Unless you are a keyboard and mouse enthusiast, you're probably playing games with a controller. Game controllers have gone from the simple joystick with a single button to a device with a dozen action buttons and multiple ways to manipulate movement. Over the years, there have been iconic controllers, great controllers, and not so great controllers. Let's take a look at the very best, at least according to me. That makes it official, you know. Welcome to the Braselspective. My first controller, along with a lot of you who probably watch this channel, was the Nintendo Entertainment System controller. I mean, it's a pretty great little controller, and for NES games, it's the controller I'd rather use. 2 action buttons, a start button, which is normally used as a pause button, and a select button that was used to select between menu items until midway through the life cycle of the console, when the developers realized that just using the directional pad was the way to go. The directional pad became popular due to its original use on the Game & Watch portable systems, and then the Japanese Famicom, and later the NES. Of course, it wasn't the only system to use one, with the Sega Master System using an 8-directional pad to Nintendo's 4 directions. The D-pad completes the iconic design of the NES controller, and sets the standard for years to come. The NES controller was greatly improved on in later years, but we'll get to that. First, I kind of wanted to grant the NES controller an honorable mention because it doesn't fall into my top 5 best controller list. I mean, top 5 favorite controllers. This is all opinion, but again, it's official if it comes from me. Take me seriously, Internet! Also, this is a super uncomfortable position to play games from. For years, Sony used the same tried and true design for their PlayStation controllers. 4 face buttons, 4 shoulder buttons, and a pretty good D-pad that appears to be 4 different individual buttons. It's not. A start and a select button, and 2 analog sticks that were later in the original PlayStation's life cycle to help with the emerging popularity of 3-dimensional games. Sony took a bit of a turn with the PS4 controller, slightly elongating the controller and giving it a bit of a different yet familiar shape. They added a touchpad and a share button, which works in the console to share gameplay footage and pictures over social media, and changed the start button to a small option button. The grip is also texturized, and a light sensor bar thing was added that I think has some function in some games, but the games I've played, it just shows that beautiful solid blue glow. I really like the controller for the most part. The size and shape are super comfortable in my hands. The detailing is slick and looks pretty good compared to the last generation of Sony's controllers. My gripe is the touchpad and the options button. The options button is way too small, and it's in a weird position that takes some getting used to when you've been playing other consoles. And the touchpad itself is more often just used as an extra button, rather than anything nifty or useful. Maybe I'm just not playing the right games. Overall, it's a solid controller, but definitely not my favorite. Remember when the Wii U Pro Controller was revealed and everyone noticed how similar it was to the Xbox 360 controller? Well, yeah, shape-wise you can definitely see it, but the button placement is way different. Is it better? I'm not sure. I like it though. It's a big, bulky, comfortable controller with the Y and X buttons in the right places. Seriously, I really want to boot Sega in the rear end for changing that up on the Dreamcast, which is probably where Microsoft took the idea. I still have problems looking at buttons when I play modern games. Anyway, the shoulder buttons feel good. The ZL and RL aren't as triggery as I'd normally like, but they still work okay. The directional pad is one of the better directional pads on a modern controller because, well, it's Nintendo, am I right? But the best point about the controller is its incredible battery life. Like, you can use this thing for weeks on end with heavy use, and it just never seems to die. I think I've charged this thing maybe 5 times since I've gotten it. And while I don't play a lot of Wii U anymore, I did play quite a bit before the Switch came out. It's a solid and comfortable controller. I have a Switch Pro controller, but I haven't used it a ton yet, seeing as I normally play that console in handheld mode. And no, the default Switch Joy-Cons aren't nearly as good as anything else on this list. But maybe after some use, the Switch Pro controller could replace the Wii U Pro controller on this list. So, I've pretty much went over the basic layout of this controller already, but the PS3 added some chunky trigger buttons to compete with Microsoft's great triggers. Before the original Xbox and Halo, it wasn't very common to use the trigger buttons for things like your main attack button, and now it's just industry standard, really. Sony updated their new controller to keep up with the pack, and I really like the direction they went. This controller is on this list because of how many years I played PlayStation consoles and how familiar I am with it. It has a great D-pad, standardly placed action buttons, and comfortable analog sticks with that nice rubber grip that keeps your thumbs from slipping. I also can't forget to mention that they made it wireless with an internal battery that can be charged by USB. This is way better than the Xbox 360 and Xbox One controllers' reliance on AA batteries, if you ask me. Unfortunately, I don't have my old DualShock 3 because I sold off my original PS3 collection some time back, but the 6-axis controller is just as nice, just minus the extra weight and the force feedback, which I've never been a huge fan of, honestly. I can take it or leave it. The PS3 controller also added some gyroscopic motion sensors that some games take advantage of. I've only played a handful of these games, like Heavenly Sword, and the implementation is spotty at best, but it's worth mentioning. All in all, I love the classic PlayStation controller design, and the PS3 has the best iteration of it. You knew this was coming. I mean, you didn't think me, Brasel, a known retro enthusiast, would create a whole top 5 list devoid of any retro controllers, did you? Well, I didn't, because the SNES controller is one of the best controllers of all time. With the SNES, Nintendo knew that the power of the console would bring about many more functions, and more functions would mean more buttons needed. The SNES controller has set the standard for all controllers to follow it. The addition of the Y and X buttons necessitated a new layout for the face buttons. Nintendo went with the Diamond, which works so well because you can use both the thumb joint and the tip of the thumb to press 2 buttons at once, and pivot your thumb around with ease. It's ingenious, and almost all official console controllers have copied it along with the shoulder buttons. I remember not even realizing the shoulder buttons were there until Super Mario World directed me to press it in-game. Now you can get your pointer fingers in on the button pressing action. The directional pad is probably the most responsive D-pad in all of gaming, and I honestly don't know why more developers don't add texture to their D-pads anymore. That helped with thumb slippage. The shape was also reformed to fit players' hands much more comfortably. This may have come about due to Sega's own curvier design of their original 3-button controller. All in all, it's one of the best controllers of all time, and if you are playing a 2D game, you can't get any better than the SNES controller. Oh, and I'll take my purple buttons and concave Y and X buttons over the Skittle buttons any day. Didn't see this one coming, did you? In all my years of gaming, I have not held a more comfortable controller. If they're weighty, big, and fill my hands, I'm happy. The Xbox One controller does this flawlessly. It improved on the 360's design by just being sleeker and better looking, not to mention the much improved D-pad and the replacement of the bulky battery box that gets in the way of my fingers. I bought an Xbox One before I had a PS4. I didn't really care that much for the console itself because of most of the games I could play on the Xbox One, I could get on my PC, and the PS4 had more exclusives I was interested in playing. I sold my Xbox One, but I kept one of my controllers because I loved it so much. The face buttons and the shoulder buttons feel great. The analog sticks are coated with rubber and feature an indent that helps keep your thumbs in place when playing. The menu and option buttons are in a good and familiar place, unlike the PS4's wonky placement. There just isn't much wrong with this controller. I do have 2 gripes. One is silly. The face buttons deviate from Nintendo standards. I mean, Microsoft has always gone this way, but when switching between Nintendo and PC, I get mixed up. Probably more than I should, but whatever. The other gripe is the fact that it uses AA batteries rather than an internal battery. But in my case, I use this controller on my PC, and I usually have it hooked up by USB cable. I do have a wireless dongle that I use when I want to use it wirelessly, but at such close proximity to the system I'm playing on, it's not usually a problem. If I were primarily playing this on an Xbox One and I had to constantly change batteries, I may have bumped it down on the list, but whatever. One of these days, if I have some extra spending cash, I may spring for an Xbox One Elite controller, because those things look dope. But at that price tag, I'm pretty happy with the controller I have. So that's it. That's all I have to say about controllers and gaming for right now. I might do a video later on where I look at controllers that I didn't like nearly as much. I'm looking at you, GameCube controller, and Nintendo 64 controller, and Wiimote. Yeah, you thought I was a Nintendo fanboy, didn't you? Anyway, thanks for watching. Later.